we're going to talk about cuttings, in case you didn't know. And first question is, why would anybody want to do cuttings? And the number one reason, which we've kind of talked about already, is you can start early. Normally, I'd have cuttings going by this stage of the game, but getting old and slow in my age, and so I haven't done it yet. My wife would never let me start before March 10th, because I did a lot of them in the house. Again, the primary reason would be because we want to grow something earlier, have more flowers sooner. You can imagine that if your planting date, as an example, would be May 20th, and you don't really know what the weather's going to be like and how warm the soil might be. But what would you rather do? Stick a tuber in the ground and gamble with the possible rot if we have a cold spring and lots of water? Oh, it makes them tough to grow. But if you start these indoors and start with cuttings on May 20th, you can plant a nice plant from your cutting at the same time that you would normally be sticking tubers in the ground. And you consequently are that far ahead of the game. For the average person who wants flowers and plants, it's a great way to go. For some of us who get involved in timing for the fair, in many cases we might be a little bit too early. I don't know if Karen or anybody else would agree with it, but normally planting toward Memorial Day gives you, is most likely to give you good flowers right at fair time. But if you start with cuttings, you can have flowers in the middle of July if you want to. Some bloom quicker than others, of course. That's one reason. Might just say that the secondary reason is because you don't have to be concerned about the rotting tuber in the ground. That's very important as far as we're concerned. Another reason might be if you're concerned with virus. When you take cuttings, and if the cutting starts growing and it looks a little bit bad, the leaf structure and form sometimes indicates a sign of virus. And if you had that situation, just throw it away and not worry about it. Otherwise, if you're planting a tuber and you wait till it's 2 feet high in the garden and then it looks virused, you're kind of way behind the power curve in that situation. So there might be another reason or two somebody might be interested in.
Because new tubers are so darn expensive.
Right?
Yes, tubers are very expensive, and if you want to take cuttings, you can pay $20 for a tuber, and by taking cuttings, you can have 2, 3, 4 plants. Some people would say that you can keep on taking those cuttings, but I've never experienced that, because every successive cutting you take is probably a little bit weaker. You see the stem is a little bit smaller, thinner. And so the best ones are always to begin with. And when you're planting dahlias, we want to focus on the most strongest, most vigorous type plant that's going to give you ultimately the best dahlia plant and the best blooms. But you can take 2 or 3 cuttings off of one tuber, which helps the economics of the growing situation. We have some slides here which I'm going to have to become familiar with as we go, but that's just a group of tubers. And sometimes you might want to leave if it gets too difficult to cut them apart, we leave them in a clump. Karen Zert would grow most of these in a clump, and they just store them in cedar chips or whatever. But there's an eye right there, and you might get a number of eyes coming out of that. If you had that sitting in some kind of a pot, you could take cuttings off of that as it grows. We'll get into this a little bit more here. Now, this is a professional grower that takes cuttings. He just has a great big tray and just puts the tubers in the tray, and he will take cuttings as the cuttings get to be 3 to 4 inches high. This is my little setup, and you'll notice these are trays that Dell was talking about here. I use those trays and have 10 of them, 10 small trays inserts in there, and that basically illustrates about the kind of light that you might want to have. I had the fluorescent lights. They normally say 8 to 9 inches above the plant and so forth. Mine are a little higher than that in this case. But you can see the sprouts coming into being here, getting ready for the cutting. And some of them are way behind, others are a little bit more. But you want to have a warm environment. Again, we're talking in the neighborhood of 70 degrees to encourage these things to grow as much as possible. And I had pretty good sunlight through south windows. This is my downstairs lower level. And with the aid of the fluorescent lights, it works really, really easy. You don't have to worry about special bulbs or anything like that in your fluorescent lights. These work perfectly fine.
Chuck, how many hours of that light do they need?
I left my lights on probably 16 hours a day, early in the morning till late at night. Let's see here, I gotta. And these are some of my cuttings. They all have labeled, of course, and they're looking good here at this point. Some are way ahead of others. Again, that's getting pretty good length there.
You got yours started now, Chuck?
I normally would have, but not this year. Getting old and slow. This is a basic illustration here of taking a cutting. These look a little short to me. I don't know, normally I probably wouldn't take that cutting yet, but they look so healthy, you can't resist. You want to get them going. And so here's a head of the tuber, the, what do they call that, the crown. At any rate, I cut a 1/16 of an inch above the crown, and that's the slice that I'm getting there, taking that off. You can take a little bit of the crown if you want to, but then you destroy the possibility of getting another cutting coming out of that same spot. Normally when you take a cutting like this, you're going to get 2, 3, 4 new sprouts coming out right where you took the cutting. If you leave a 1/16 of an inch there, if you cut it all the way down, some people would say that if you take a little bit of the crown of the old tuber, you're going to be a little more likely or more easily get roots on the cutting. But I don't know, it's hard to always determine that. They all should grow fairly easily. The important thing in doing this is the temperature and some light. Again, the fluorescent light is very adequate. We're talking about soil before, what you start your tubers in, and just standard potting soil that you can buy anywhere works perfectly fine. The tricky part comes to start the tuber or start the cutting itself, and many people do it different ways. And there's a place out in California called Corralitos that sells cuttings by the thousands, and they have what they call sea sand out there in their dirt, and he uses sea sand and has good luck with it. I've tried pure sand around here. I didn't like it as well as a mixture of. It's important to try to have sterile ingredients here. Some of these operations, cutting operations, guys even wear white gloves. It's almost like an operating room. Try to keep it as sterile and disease-free as possible. Everybody's house is different. Everybody's got mold spores running around, and you have the possibility, if you don't have a really good environment, you might pick up some kind of fungal disease on these cuttings, which makes it bad, of course. So it's important to be sterile. And I use knives like these that you can buy in any hardware store. I really like the razor knife. Somebody else is doing a straight razor here, but you can see basically he's got a couple of different sprouts coming out of there if we used as cuttings. And this is another illustration down. You can't see the nose of the tuber here, but get right down.
Hey Chuck,
Yeah.
when you make your cut there underneath that, I've heard that if you pulled the bottom 2 leaves off, that's where the roots start.
Oh
out.
yeah. See, these are nodes. Everybody
Yeah,
talks
true.
about wants to know what a node is. This is a good illustration of a node here.
Okay.
You want to have your cutting just below the node, and the roots are going to come out anywhere in that area. Also, one of the questions that people always worry about is am I going to get real tubers off of that cutting? And the secret to that is to have 2 or 3 leaf pairs before you take the cutting here. You got one leaf pair, and then you got another leaf pair here. And if you can take your cutting and get them started in dirt, then you would plant out in the garden right above this cutting, or right above this node here, because your roots and your new tubers are going to come out of the new node area. Not only roots, but the new tubers for next year grow. So if you plant this cutting deep enough in your outdoor soil, you should have no trouble making lots of tubers. If you don't plant it deep enough, you're going to have a little more of a problem forming new tubers for next year. Let's see what else we got here.
Do you cut those leaves back?
Just a second. Here's this again. This looks a little bit short to me. I'm a little bit surprised. I'd normally like to have them good length, but this would be your one node here, where we're going to get the initial rooting of the cutting, and would also be a place for new tubers to start. But this is a second node here, so you could take these leaves off too. Here I've cut these leaves off at this lower section, and also I cut at a 45-degree angle here. 45 always gives you a little more surface area, a little better probability of forming roots also. But he's got remove in here, and so we can take off these leaves here on each side. You can take off these leaves, and you got 2 nodes to give future tubers to you.
Now, do you add like a root powder onto them to get them start rooting?
That's a great question, very debatable. Some people that grow many cuttings don't use a single thing, and they claim it's totally unnecessary. Other people are always going to be inclined to try to use something, and I've used it all at one time or another. They got a lot of nice liquids these days that work very easily. I don't particularly like the powder. If you stick that stem in powder, that end there, it clogs the pores up in the stem itself. It's like putting a concrete layer over the end of the stem. I'm getting signals in the back there, if I can read them. Mike, more Mike? Okay. What were we talking about there?
Next slide has,
Next slide.
The next slide has a picture of it.
These are different ways of planting. It doesn't make an awful lot of difference. These are things you can buy. If anybody's been to the Brew and Grow store on Central Avenue, Central and County Road 10, they would sell you all of these things. And I've done them all, and it really doesn't make a lot of difference. We were talking about the root encourager that you can buy also, and I have used it and I have not used it. I can't tell the difference really either. It depends a lot on your environment. If you got a nice combination of sand and, again, I'll use the word sterile sand and what you would call seed germination soil, that's the best thing to root in. And if you got the right environment, a little light and a little moisture, not a lot. You never want it soggy. You just want moisturized, you might say.
Chuck, have you grown in oasis?
Grown in, well, no, not in oasis, but I have these. This is kind of an insulation material. And there's my stuff that I used to at one time. Whoop, pack up.
Yeah.
And you know, just take the cutting and you just stick it down in there and keep it warm and moist. The one thing I probably haven't mentioned yet that's critical is the moisture, because again, you don't have any roots, so everything's going to dry out if you don't keep things moist. And most people would take a tray and you would put it in a gallon-sized bag. 13-gallon sized bag accommodates a lot of these cuttings. That's one way to do it. You just have to have some sticks in there to support the plastic, keep it off the leaves. And of course, you can always give them a spray of moisture to keep the humidity up inside your container. And they normally would say that you want them in the bag for at least 11 days. At 11-day point, you should have some root formation. I would encourage you to even go a little over 11 days. Some people would say leave the bag open. I don't know how you retain the humidity under those circumstances. Normally you have to close them up to some degree to retain the moisture in there for the humidity for the leaves.
Do you fertilize?
Can't do any fertilizing before 20 days. And then you might do kind of a third of the designated amount, of the normal amount, and water with a third 20-20-20 is a good thing to use.
Like on Miracle-Gro, you dilute it, where it's very...
I think you can use just about anything. Some fertilizers, advocate different growth and different environment and so forth, but
They're tender, so be roll.
Is your soil temp still at about 70 degrees with the cuttings?
yes, I'm in a room here. This is indoors. I've got that inside my south windows, and again, we see different forms. Again, this is that insulation material there. This is a more firm, this is like that green stuff that you were talking about. And it all works. And this guy's working with rubber gloves, as you can see, trying to keep things pure. And that's what they look like after, I'm going to say, a good 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, that's what you would expect to see.
Then when do you plant those?
Well, when they get to that stage, you might want to transfer them into a 4x4 pot, a 3x3 or a 4x4 pot, and just keep them watered. Just keep them watered and a reasonable temperature. I would put them in a greenhouse and at that stage and try to maintain the temperature in the greenhouse. Temperature isn't so critical now. Once we get roots, everything is a little less critical. So the hard part is just getting those roots to form. Here they talk about Oasis cubes. And he's got this already potted up even, so I think I have a slide of that too. So you don't have to worry about the growth here. The roots will keep growing inside that pot, and when you get this ready to throw it out in the garden, just take it out and transplant it like you would any other flower. And this is really a tall cutting. That's really interesting. I don't think that's one of mine. I would never let that get out of hand that far. But there's a planting situation. If you were to buy cuttings from organizations that sell them, they would come in plastic deals like this and be about that size and so forth. And that's getting snug there. That's time to transplant it either into a 4x4 pot or into the ground if the temperature is adequate. And that's what a dahlia looks like. That's what you're shooting for. I'm a little surprised that I didn't see one of the, I was going to show you, transplanting them into a larger pot. But again, it's just, you got to get some roots going, then you can do anything you want with them. And the big advantage again is to have a nice plant to put out in the garden when temperatures permit, and I'll say May 20th. But again, the soil temperature should be up in that 60-degree range. Kyle?
Chuck, you don't need windows though, right? As long as you got your lights.
Yeah, you wouldn't need windows.
Don't have windows.
It's
so
just
don't let
a
that
little
distract
additional light, that's all it is, but they grow perfectly fine under fluorescent.
Yep.
Some people would claim that they get very lanky and all that sort of thing. Well, I've never experienced that. Mine are a little bit too short even, a lot of those cuttings. I would have let them grow a little more before I took the cutting. But
It's because to keep that light low.
yeah, the light, and again, you know what, too much heat, every bulb sends off a certain amount of heat, and you don't want that sucking the moisture out of anything that you got growing under the bulb. So keep that bulb, or the bulb should be 6 inches anyway from above your plants.
So if we have those heating pads to get the seeds to pop, will you use that?
It's, there is a slide that would show that too. In a commercial operation, they run wires in the trays under the dirt. long wires. And I could tell you too, that, you know, it's fun to do it in the house, but I have also dug a trench in the garden, good 6 inches deep, and I have put electric wires in there for warmth out in the garden, and take a garbage recycle container and put over that, and they love growing in the garden. And I wouldn't call that exactly sterile out there, but they seem to like it more growing in that dirt, whether it's the microbiology aspect of the soil or whatever it is, but they like that, and it's a great way to go.
Now, is that 120 that you put in there?
Say it again.
120 voltage that you put the wire?
Yeah, 120, yeah. All those wires, the wires are made to maintain about a 70-degree temperature. Most of the wires, I know, they probably vary a little bit, but, yes, John.
Yeah, Chuck, I started over 500 dahlias today from seed.
Yeah,
And like I say, I use a hot box. I built my second hot box this last week. It's a 2-foot square, which I put growing medium in, and then I have my little seed packs that I start in my seeds in. But I find that works excellent for starting seeds or cuttings. But it's bottom heat is really essential for flowers to get running. And the thing is that people don't have a hot box like I have, a germination box. You can buy the coils. I use the wire coils, and I've got the heat mats. I don't like the mats as well as the coils. But you can use even, I used to use for years, sounds crazy, but the old TV set would be hot. And you could put it on top of my TV at home, and I could get bottom heat,
Yeah.
and then it would start branching.
bottom heat is really nice to
The
have.
bottom heat makes the roots go deep, because that makes them grow.
Yeah.
It's just a real slick way of doing it. It's great. The one thing I was saying, I tried my cuttings last year. I put my fluorescent light on, my grow lights, and I got them down a little bit too close. And new plants and new cuttings don't want real bright lights.
Yeah.
It's just like if you go, anyone that's sick or wounded, you don't want to go in and have a cold or a flu. You don't want to be in bright lights. You want to be in a darker, dimmer room. It's the same way with cuttings and flowers. Keep them a little bit dim and then increase the light on them, because they take off much faster by bringing them in slow and bringing them up than to start them out real hot.
It's true.
Cook them.
And I even started them in styrofoam cups initially. And I would take a cutting and I'd stick it in a styrofoam cup, just like drinking cups here, normal cups, and put a baggie over the top. If you stick a stick in there just to hold the baggie up off the leaves of the plant. But that works perfectly good. Punch holes in the bottom of your styrofoam cup, put a baggie over it, and it works fine. But the warmth, the temperature is good, and to have a little bottom heat, yeah, it does help, I will say that.
I have another question here. At the dollar store I bought,
Oh, there's a picture. Where did you get that from? That was what I was looking for. These are wires here, and they just cover it with a certain amount of soil. And that, you know, nothing special about that soil, I would say. It's a very sandy looking type of deal, but that's the way the commercial grower would grow it.